steel plate actually cracked. Part of the wall, but I cannot actually discern what it is.
Here in the Hürtgen is what the Americans later called the meat grinder. Events here had begun in September 1944 and soon became a vast slaughter as the Allies tried to break into the Siegfried Line near Aachen. It was assumed that the German soldiers, who had by now been conducting a slow retreat all the way from Normandy, would continue to retreat or simply falter. However, now the Germans were fighting for their homeland, and with a shortened supply line also, all battle-hardened veterans too. That the Americans had chosen to make their advance through the Hürtgenwald was by the Germans seen as a miracle. Walter Modell, commander of the Army Group B, was very well pleased when he knew that his forces could hold here, hold against a much larger force. The American First Army, with 14 U.S. divisions, would eventually be involved in the fighting, and initially outnumbered the Germans 5-1. The Germans initially had 2 understrength infantry divisions of some 5,000 men, with 1,000 more in reserve for the defense of this area. They were under command of the German General Hans Schmidt, who was later reinforced as the battle went on. The attrition on the American forces in the rain and mud and later snow caused a new, inexperienced troops to be inserted into the line. These were killed in even larger numbers than the veteran soldiers who had been now lost and wounded. Initially, a few of the outlying villages were taken by the Americans, but they were unable to advance into the forest itself. The Germans were well supplied, occupying the strategic high grounds and avenues of advance, and the West Wall bunkers. On 5th of October, the 60th 2nd Battalion lost 2/3 of its men in one day alone, many due to tree bursts and artillery. By the 16th of October, the Americans had advanced only 3,000 meters into the forest and still lost 4,500 men. Mines, bullets, hidden guns, and artillery made every yard extremely costly. And all this before the snow had even fallen. And let's not forget about Operation Northwind, still to come. When the German supply routes were finally cut as the Americans took the town of Schmidt on the 3rd of November, they would lose it again the next day to a fierce German counterattack by the 116th Panzer Division. It became a struggle match, as both sides sent in tanks, but ultimately the Germans held the high ground and the town, and the Americans withdrew on November 8.
We're out in Hürtgenwald, where there was a very determined battle not far from Aachen in 1944, and here's one more of the old West Wall bunkers. Of course, demolished, now slowly overgrown. Looks like a defensive position. I would imagine the forest roads will still have been here, been there then. Wow, really not much to see. See, there's a way in. There's a way in. There's the roof sitting on the ground. Can barely even tell what it was. Many of these were blown up during the fighting, so they couldn't be recaptured and reused. Yeah, there's not much to this. See the shrapnel on the wall. Pieces of the metal are torn. Let's see if there's more of them out here. On the other side of that little ridge, 350 meters away, I'm standing on the side of where there used to be the next bunker in the line. I see little pieces of rubble, and there's another one there about 150 meters. So these were actually packed in quite densely. And I know there was a notation that this had been blown up or destroyed. And I said so many of these have been destroyed, grind up into road construction, or just blown up and covered up. So it's very hard to tell if there's even any physical remains of this position. But what I wanted to go through was how close they were actually packed. This was much more of a defensive line, much denser than we would have been led to believe when you see some of the reports from that time. Yeah, look at this. I'm actually, all the rubble I'm standing on, here, there it is. Yep. That's the side of one. When they said blown up, they meant it. Very, very well blown up. It's here. Here is a piece of the, see here was a groove for the rebar. So this was part of it. I almost missed it. Here's the foundation wall, just 100 meters away from the rubble. And the other one is over there. This is where it was. There's a hunter's shack on top of it now, but see the rebar sticking out. Yeah, this little triangle. That's all that's left. Well, standing on this one, down there, you can just barely see the remnants of the next one. So I'll go have a look at that. There's a lot of, you can still see the remains of in this very small area. So right up on that little hill on the side was the next bunker. And here's the next one after that. 200 meters beyond this is the first one that we saw that was demolished. There was a very dense cluster of them right here. And there's a lot of rubble in the forest floor still sitting here. Said at this point I don't know if this was blown up by the Americans fighting for it after having taken it, or post-war by Germans or French. But that's, well, it's shall we say, no longer here. At least not as a functioning shelter. But just noticing how many there are clustered together in such a small area should start to give you some idea that the west wall with its 3 building faces was not just a little shack with a door to kick in. This was left of the firing parapet. Well, it's not a parapet. That was left of the firing position. Little groove in there for the wood. But yeah, this really came apart when they blew it up. I still had a little bit of the green paint left. That still shows the color from that day. Wow. And this would have been the back. Oh well. Still something left of it here. Even a little writing on it. So back here was the back entrance into the main room. That is all gone. There would have been a steel plate for rear defense. What's that thing say? That's hard to tell. This was actually rather large then. This must have been rather large, because the other side was rather big. And there's the emergency exit, what's left of it. Room in there, main room, and then on the other side of here, probably a fighting compartment. Well, that's kind of hard to tell. I wonder if somebody scrapped the steel beams from here, since the roof is just full of protruding rebar. Looks like there's the stove. See the indents from the rebar. Emergency exit. I was curious about this, if this was the actual stove. Yeah, this is either ventilation or stove. Well, it's another destroyed World War II West Wall bunker.
As we walk the battlefield today, you can see the string of bunkers and imagine how they were defended with trenches and more machine gun positions. You can stand and visually see the next bunker from the next and the next, not including the mountainous terrain and the hills they had to force.
Here leading to it is what remains of a trench that would lead up to the rear entrance. It's hard to see now. Bunkers up there. So there was a trench running here. These trenches are fairly quickly and easy to dig. Let's go see where that goes. Yeah, there's an actual trench here. So you had all these individual bunkers that was some were connected by the trench system and some had them for close defense, of course. Yeah, it circles, the trench circles the bunker. So the expected direction of the fight would be down here. That makes sense because all three bunkers seems to be pointing their fighting front in this direction. It's interesting to be in Hürtgen here. When you read so much about the ferocious battles that took place here, and here it's so peaceful, and quiet and serene, but you still find like holes, craters, trenches. If I had the time, I would love to go through here with a metal detector, but I'm trying to figure out where the fighting positions were and how they were laid out. Compare that to the east wall and to the Maginot Line.
On 16 November, the 4th Infantry Division launched a thrust to clear the northern forest and the village itself of Hürtgen. It was held by 6,500 Germans and defended by 150 artillery guns. The 8th and the 22nd Infantry Regiment both met heavy resistance, and they had to pull back, as engineers now tried to blast paths for tanks to move forward. The Germans were also reinforced. On the 25th of November, 5th Corps tried, but advanced less than 600 yards that day. Hürtgen town fell on the 9th of November.
And you gotta give it to them for location. This is a perfect defensive position. This is the ridge we're on. Over here on this hillside are all the bunkers, full fortified position, trenches in between, behind me are more. You have a full view of the valley below here and can control all access. We're not far from Aachen and the entrance to Germany.
This really is unforgiving terrain. This is the kind of place You get there first and you hold on to it, because you really don't want to be driven out by anybody and have to retake it.
Now, if ever I've seen a place for the perfect fighting position, sitting down there overlooking this valley would probably be it. You can see and dominate everything from here through this line. And also just the construction of where I am on this outcropping from the forest road. It took a bit of logistics to build here, but I always said when they built the tea house, when Bormann had that built, they learned a lot about building in places like this. Although, of course, the tea house was a different animal entirely, if you will. They learned from the Kehlstein house a lot of building and construction techniques that were used later in the war. And architects from all over Germany went to that construction to learn and to participate. You would almost think that was a deliberate military training maneuver, although theoretically the military was not involved in the Kehlstein house. What they learned there was put to use in places like this. Oh, this is just a fun, great place to walk and play, kids. Where's it? Well, there's a roof. Holy, I mean, seriously, look at this. Do you want to be anywhere else to fight? Do you want to be the ones to climb up this mountain to take this position? Seriously, do you want to be the one coming up here? What an amazing view up here. And the bunker is here. I'm standing on it. Wow, down there's the road. You can just see, you can just hint the road way down below. And then the valley here, where the Americans would come up. What an amazing view. I wish I brought my lunch here. This is just amazing. And it looks like there was an original observation deck here with the little steel cabling. Also, it's interesting because there's hooks for the camouflage net, of course, and then there was these poles. I almost think they would have protruded from a camouflage net, but let's see if we can get down and in here somehow. Of course, we don't have to mention, I don't have to mention that it was blown up, do I? Of course it was. Still see the green paint. I almost for a minute thought that some of all these loose stones were used as part of a camouflage pattern. But if they were, there wouldn't be green paint on it, I imagine. Wow. So in there, that's where the firing position would have been, in there, I believe. Yeah, the railing has come down. What a place. Maybe we can get in. Maybe. Well, me. I was thinking there was a firing position. I don't think there's a way for me to get in there. Yeah, that's not gonna happen. I'll have to go in, but I'm not making it through that hole. Tell you what, when I finally expire, just shove my ashes in here, put up a sign on top. If you're gonna end the rest of your life with this view, that wouldn't be a bad place. A little memorial candle there by the butterfly. Oh, the butterfly went away. Looks like there's writing on there, but could also have been covered up, hard to tell. This is natural rock. You would think this would be something that you could blend into the construction for camouflage. But you are sitting on the outcropping of a peak overlooking a valley. So this place would have been an automatic bomb magnet. Anybody in their right mind would believe that the opposition would be sitting on this mountaintop, sheltered or entrenched, or at least a guy with a pair of binoculars and a radio. Too bad we can't get in. I would love to see how big this was inside. I'm sure we can find the plans somewhere. There's a path here. Well, there's a path here. That's the mountain, not the bunker. This is natural rock. I keep thinking if I keep going this way, this really looks like this would have had to have been, and I'm not going to say communication trench because you wouldn't be able to dig into this, but some sort of a road. I thought maybe leading to another position. And it's quite possible that sitting right down there is another position.
Military routes of advance generally remains the same since they're all dependent on the terrain. And here the Germans planned out their fortresses, their bunkers, the defensive positions way in advance of the possibility of an Allied or French advance. And they did an amazing job. It would be hard to not admire a generation of soldiers, young GIs who fought for these bunkers, even in flat terrain, but fighting their way uphill through barbed wires and machine gun grenades raining down on them to finally take one of these positions, only to be driven out again days later to have to retake it again. Sometimes these bunkers would lose and be retaken 4 or 5 times. So no wonder the soldiers at the times had the engineers blow them up to make sure they wouldn't have to fight and die for one particular bunker more than once.
What a place to fight. This would have been horrible. But yes, there's another bunker down there, also blown. Up there is a road. That's a modern road, not sure. The original road would have been there. That's going to be a fun walk back up. Well, it was built at the time of the war. It's part of the wall, but I cannot actually discern what it is. The fighting position was up there, with the valley here. So, what are you, buddy? It wouldn't just be a wall. There wouldn't just be a retaining wall here. I actually don't know what this is. Surprisingly, going on top of it didn't help me. I don't know what this is. I don't see why there would be a retaining wall up in this direction. Very interesting. Ah, here's something else. Alright. This looks like a fighting position, but if that was the back wall, where's the roof? This will be down in the valley here. Yeah, this is. I know what this is. It is a very thick. Oh, and all the mountain bikers here are hiding their gear here. I dig that. Let's go in. That's interesting. Wait a minute, I'm sitting on the ventilation pipe. Okay. I don't have to say it's blown up, did I? But let's see, get out of my way. Mosquitoes, bugs, strange things. Alright. This is a way in. I don't even know this way out. If this is a way in. Oh. Alright, so there's a drop in front of me. There's the door. It's a fairly big room. It could be the wall over there was the back room. I want to bet I can get in from the other side. Let's see. This is fairly large. Firing position again, pointing this way. Over the ridge up here, the lookout. Behind there's the wall. And down here, there's another. And over there's as well. And if it went all the way into that, up against that wall, I was wondering where the roof was. I may have found part of it. This is the inside of a roof that I'm standing on that was blown over here. Sections of it. But this would be flipped over. So when they blew it, it came from way over on the other side of that. That's probably a piece from it too. Wow. And of course the view from this bunker is rather spectacular. As long as you're not an American GI down there, having to want to climb and fight your way up to it. No wonder this was hard fighting. This is a fairly big bunker. Hell of a view. All right. Huh. Well, lots of rebar. I will say this really does remind me of the Ostwall. construction is not that many years apart. There's a back wall, and in here where it's collapsed is another room and another section. You're starting to see that the west wall is more than you thought. From up there, huge position here that was blown. Another back wall here. Across the road over here, it's the next one.
On the 14th of November, the 2nd Ranger Battalion relieved the 112th Infantry Battalion and began their attack up the steep hill 400. On 6th of December, they initially took the hill and at times were down to 25 fighting men. They held it against 5 determined German counterattacks. But eventually the Germans retook the hill and held on to it until February.
And here we are on the other side of the Hürtgen village, with another great view to the other side, and the command bunker, which looks far more intact than I've seen before. So let's go have a look at that. Well, compared to what we've usually seen, this is in quite good shape. First, the defensive position. The walls a little pregnant. You see some of the inside. It has an amazing view over this valley. Well, let's go have a look. Let's go have a look at the command bunker for this area. Obviously, there would be a lot more of them. Well, hence the pregnancy. There's a door in there. Separating the wall. This was the outer walkway, because here's the other defensive position in both directions. There and there. And the roof has lifted off. Lifted up, came down on the roof of this. You see how thick that is. Here for the door hinges. See a little bit of shrapnel going on in the wall down there from the demolition, I would assume. Alright, regular sized door. First things that strikes me. Oh, this is actually quite big compared to what I had expected. So this is the back wall. That's the back wall. But a substantial fighting position. Emergency exit. Wood peg for mounting stuff on the walls. And what's left of the firing position here. Actually, the steel plate actually cracked. I haven't seen that before. Wow, a lot of bugs in here. That would have been door frame. Almost still have the attachments for what was on the wall there. And the wood is still in place. Oh. The room is in much better shape. I do not know the door was original. It's another close defensive position. And the last room. A little cracked, mountings for pipes, the wood, and the beds. Yes. But the beds would have been in here. At least a few. Now this is a different type of little hatch than we've seen before. That's not going anywhere. This is not what we usually see. These used to be much heavier, much larger and thicker. That explains why it cracked on the other side. I've never seen any of these plates for firing positions actually crack, but this is a much thinner metal. I wonder if we're looking at a recent build closer to the time of fighting, where materials were more scarce, as was metal, which explains why this was almost a regular door with metal on it. Almost a regular door sill here. Walls are probably also not as thick as we've seen before. I'm actually going to go out on a limb and say this might have been a late war build. Still the rebar and steel in the ceiling, but it doesn't look as if there's as much. That might just be me. But yeah, same thing here. This is much thinner. Otherwise this would never have cracked like that. Never seen that before. And way over the other side, opposing side of the mountain, there is probably a position mirroring this one. I think this was the original wall. There's a pipe there for ventilation. I mean, there's a substantial thickness, don't get me wrong. It just somehow feels lighter, somehow. Less reinforced. Maybe the next one will give us a better idea. Ventilation. Maybe. Overpressure. Close defensive, yes. No Tobruk on the roof. But you have this view. I would think a command bunker would be facing the other side of the hill in safety, and a firing position will be placed here. That doesn't seem to be the case. And we're just going to take a minute and enjoy the view and imagine how you could dominate a battlefield over here, water crossings, anything.
This small hill in the landscape have been the site of thousands of casualties and heroic fighting, and is full of memorials and dedications to those who fought here.
And up here in the mountain was a fighting position where at least these two Americans were killed. One of the Rangers and one from the 121st 8th Infantry. We're back on the battlefield, coming up here to the top. Now that tower is new. But up here, you have trenches, signs of shelling. The Germans were dug in up here in infantry positions. The interesting thing about battlefields like this one on the top of this mountain overlooking the valley below, all the way back to 1090, there was a castle with a wall here, or at least a city wall, fortified city, up until the 12th century. This is the remains of that wall in the same place that 1944 the Germans and Americans fought so bitterly as the Americans were trying to make their way through this forest. And here, I believe, is another shelter. Here is part. This is very hard to tell what is what. See, the nature has been changed, but this may not have been a shelter. Well, I don't see any rebar. None. I think this is natural stone. That's there's no paint on this. There's no. I think this is natural stone. No, wait a minute. It can't be. This is cement. Cement inside. Stones inside. Gravel inside. Very rough. This could have been a lot older. That's very hard to tell. This is very hard to tell what or when this was. I need some sort of a marker from World War II, something. Piece of metal, piece of paint, anything that'll sort of give this away. This is part of the original tower. Just like here. Wow. So this is 1,000 years old. Right here on top of the mountain. And I guarantee you the German soldiers in World War II were using this as a defensive point. So they were fighting out of a 1,000-year-old fortress wall. This is part of the old castle walls, or fortress wall from 1100. I wonder how that looked before the war, because if it was here and it looks the way it does, anybody from the Allied anything would have bombed it and shelled it. Germans would have used it for cover.
This is indeed a part of the old city fortress that was full with walls and moats and fighting positions. It has been destroyed and rebuilt several times over, including an observation tower that was here before the war and destroyed at the end of it. This LiDAR image will also give you a good idea of where and how the fortress was laid out, and exactly how this hill with all its obstacles was to be overcome by the Rangers. Aachen was the first real German city that was reached by Allied armies in 1944. It was of no real strategic importance, but it held a great psychological importance because it was the first German city that was to be fought for. The West Wall was initially at that time defended by over 230,000 German troops manning the line. The city of Aachen was protected by over 10 miles of in-depth defensive systems, bunkers, dragon teeths, and a lot of fighting positions and minefields, as well as a very dense forest that was surrounding the city. This was ideal defensive terrain, and the Americans were going to pay a heavy price for it. the city was defended by the 116th Panzer Division under Gerhard von Schwerin. However, he wanted to surrender, not wanting to destroy the beautiful ancient city and risk all the civilians' lives, those that inevitably be lost. So he was fired. Now, Commander Gerhard Wilk was put in charge of the city's defenses and the 20-some thousand soldiers who were positioned in and around the city, including initially 11 tanks. It was the U.S. 1st Infantry Division that attacked, but they had severe supply problems as well, and eventually in October, the 1st SS Leibstandarte arrived also for the defense of the city. German units were mostly under strength, and they were fitted now by relatively new recruits too. The general U.S. strategy was to surround the city first. That happens in October, but it was costly, and it was hard going for the U.S. Army to make it through to the city center. It was the very worst of house-to-house fighting, with artillery pieces at times firing point-blank at strongholds, and with a lot of historical buildings destroyed. On the 21st of October, the city fell, with over 10,000 soldiers on both sides having fallen, with many more wounded. It can be said that the Battle of the Hürtgen Forest was a clear American defeat. They had lost over 33,000 men and 9,000 more non-combat losses, with Germans only 28,000 dead, wounded, and prisoners taken. But the Germans were still holding on to the main parts of the line, and it was only now that the Ardennes offensive was about to begin.
Behind me is Werner von Braun's first test stand. Down the road is Dietmar's nuclear reactor. Over there is the Maginot Line and all its amazing forts. I'm visiting them all and I'm bringing them to you. So I really appreciate you like, follow, and share what I'm doing, trying to document all these important historical locations. And if you feel like you want to watch more pictures or documents that I use for these, go to lostbattlefields.com. And if you feel like helping me out with my travels, because gasoline and travel and airfare is expensive, my PayPal is there, protectionserviceint.com. You are more than welcome, but you don't have to. I appreciate all your support and all your help, and I love seeing these locations, and I love bringing them to you.